question of out-of-school children in Dadaab, and through those of you who understand scouting movement, is quite exciting activities, outbound activities. Children were attracted back to school through the scout members that were very, very vocal and very active within the school environment. We also used the clubs and support of these clubs to also kind of rehabilitate, talk to the children that were back to school on basic issues of education and issues of how to conduct themselves as children who are back to school through a friendly manner in a club model. So we found those two clubs to be very essential in terms of supporting the children who are back to school and those that are in school. One other result that we discovered is that by involving the Kenya Police is viewed by the refugees as a hostile group for some reasons that you can understand. That we looked for partnership with the Kenya Police to help to demystify the notion that police are perpetrators of violence to children and parents. So we sourced for focal police officers, men and women, that would help in training children to understand protection and to also understand the role of police in terms of providing protection for children and community. We found that as a very, very good approach because at the end of the day, for once police and children, police and teachers were talking to each other without hostility. They would understand or discuss a topic without any hostility amongst them. I'm reminded about the time. Finally, I talked about the outreach program that we did for the out-of-school children. That we did, and particularly we're focusing on children that are considered minority. Sorry. If you go back. Children that are considered to be from the minority clans or from minority nationalities. I should have mentioned to you that Dadaab is not a Somali only, is predominantly Somali refugees, but we have other nationalities that are considered minority. So they run the risk of their rights being abused, and we used the clubs to reach out on small clans or small minority groups that are there in school to help involve them in activities, child-related activities or children-related activities, also to involve them in advocating for their own rights as minorities. This has not gone without a number of challenges. I just want to mention three. There could be more, but I want to mention three. That one, in the process of integrating protection to education, protection is still seen as a foreign intervention into education. It is still seen as foreign. It's still considered not education proper. Still seen as something that is coming either to interfere or to curtail or to disrupt the traditional teaching learning processes as we know it. Not mentioning the disciplinary processes that could go on in a normal school process. That is the first thing. The second thing is that the second challenge is that courtesy of the camp reduction, transfer of refugees from one camp to another, we have experienced quite an increase in child-headed households. And children are deserted or children are left alone to fend for themselves by parents who go back home, or children who go back to Somalia, as the case is, or children that are left in the camp that are not necessarily of Somali origin. Because with the camp consolidation, it also meant that the non-Somali refugees were to be relocated to another camp called Kakuma Kaloboye, far from Dadaab. And children that were maybe in the process of doing their examination, Kenya national examination, or were not consulted or were not comfortable living, they were left alone back in Dadaab. And it raised a lot of protection concerns. Finally, in terms of challenges, we are speaking about a very conservative community, that is the Somali, who are the majority, and they do have socio-cultural practices that are repugnant to protection, if I can put it like that. That issues of FGM and, yes, I have a minute now. Issues of FGM and was settling issues of abuses out of court. Through a system that is called maslaha, that a child would be abused, and then parents would agree to sort the issue out of court, and that has worked towards maybe propagating or encouraging, in one way or the other, abuses or breach of human rights or children's rights in the camp. I want to finish with some lessons that we have learned. 3 key lessons that working within the school can work, is functional. We can have school-based interventions that can bear results. School-based interventions involving parents, teachers, and children can bear results. 2, we can develop referral mechanisms. Even in an integrated way, we can develop referral mechanisms that can increase opportunities for access for education and access to rights. And finally, involving the police or demystifying, involving the police who are seen as enemies of the people, enemies of protection or perpetrators of violence, involving the police in the course of interventions, be it in protection or an integrated approach in education. I can talk about Dadaab and protection issues until camels come back home. We have a lot of camels in Dadaab. Good afternoon.
And the last but not the least, it's UNICEF presentation on child protection and education integrated programs in Sudan.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Sylvester Malu. I work for UNICEF Sudan as Child Protection and Emergency Specialist. Sudan, as most of you may know, is faced with a very challenging situation. What do I mean by that? We have a complex emergency wherein we have our own IDPs, we have our own returnees, and of course, from across the borders, we have refugees from South Sudan coming in. We have refugees from Ethiopia, Eritrea, and so forth. And our conflict in some parts of Sudan state region. And with all of those situations we have at hand, we need to address the situation for children. How can we ensure a safe and protective environment for children? So as you can see there, we have 2 outcomes. One of them is talking about children in conflict-affected areas have access and use, not only access to, but also use the services that are there. Life-saving child protection services that includes education. Education, as you may know, is a form of power. It enhances the protection of children by children themselves. So another outcome to look at there is children, especially after of certain age group that may have been left behind by some of our programming, they have access to some other services. So adolescents and children should be one of those priorities that we have to look at, and of course the families and the communities when it comes to being resilient about some of those challenges that they face. So this morning, I would like to take you back to the first video clip that we saw, where children were talking about issues that affect them and what they wanted to see. That is a classic example of resilience when we talk about children and family and communities being resilient to some of these issues that affect children in there. So those are the that's a model of what we are engaged in. So we do this through adolescent clubs, youth groups, both in school and out of school. Many times we try to focus our attention on children in school where we establish only school clubs. Yes, we acknowledge the fact that school clubs are there to help enhance the knowledge of children in school. But what about those that are out of school? What do we do for them? Some people may say child-friendly space. Yes, child-friendly space. But from my experience and from what we do in there, the child-friendly spaces are not places that youth and adolescents will want to go. So what do? We have tried to stimulate youth groups in recent times, most especially this year. We have increased the number of youth and adolescent groups. We have trained them, and they are able to articulate issues that are affecting them. So as a result of those two, we have seen an improvement in access to education. So we are using the children or youth groups as a model to motivate other children that are out of school to come back to school. We reckon that there are issues that the families are faced with, especially in Sudan. The issue of IDs or certificates for the children to get back to school. The issue of payment of fees for children to get back to school. So we've worked with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Social Affairs to ensure that there is a kind of a dispensation for children, especially displaced and refugees, children that are coming there to access school without some of those hindrances. Then, of course, an enhancement of knowledge has helped to reduce the risks and vulnerability of children, especially those that are coming to school. Violence in school has come down. Why? Because the teachers themselves have been involved or they have participated in training activities that have increased their knowledge on child rights and protection. So with this, children that go to school, they feel safer in their school environment. Children that are out of school are reached through community-based child protection networks. So once they are reached there and their issues are identified, the referral mechanism that we've put together through the collaborative efforts of education and child protection, the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Social Affairs have helped children to come back to school. And those that are not in school, there are alternative learning environments that have been established. So then we look at some of the challenges. There's no work without a challenge. So recently, sometime last year, we developed a letter of understanding with UNHCR to implement or to respond to refugee situation, especially for children, those that are in camp and those that are outside of the camps. As a matter of fact, the number of refugees we have in the camps, they are lesser than those that are outside of the camp. So we have a memorandum of understanding. But then this letter of understanding did not take into consideration that child protection and education, they should all go in the same locations. So that presented a challenge for us in terms of our programming and our coordination. There are areas where we have education, our education colleagues are acting, and there are other areas that we as child protection are working. So our level of coordination is somehow divided in there. We said not all schools that have social workers. Some of the schools have social workers, some of them do not have social workers. So what do? We need to increase, we need to make an appeal or advocate to ensure that some of those children, those social workers are deployed in the schools. So, of course, like other presenters have said, the lack of incentives for teachers and social workers is one of those challenges that we are facing. The lack of common donors and purposes. So what we have tried to do, we know that since child protection and education, we do not have most of the times the same donors, we have tried to work on integrated proposals. Okay, integrated proposals, but it does not end at the proposal or planning stages. We also do joint monitoring. Okay, so that will help us in terms of our programming. So to end up, some of the lessons learned we've seen there. Can you please table one? We say joint integration activities increase UNICEF footprints. So we've seen that in recent times, because of our joint integration, education and child protection programming, we have increased our footprint in the areas we work. Okay? It has also helped us. Many times, child protection, even from my experience in Somalia, there are many times that we say there's no fund for child protection programming, but education we have. So with the integrated proposal and so that we've had, we have been able to at least secure funding for child protection, maybe for the next 1 year or so, as we strive further to ensure that we get additional funding. So we say establishment of stronger link between the ministries of education and the Ministry of Social Affairs to ensure that the smooth and efficient referral pathway are in place. Then, of course, building the capacity of teachers, as I mentioned earlier, is one of those key areas that we need to look at that will help to reduce the violence for children and increase the protection of children as well. We say school clubs will support PSS, yes, but it also is also going to help in terms of building the life skills for children. Let me go to the next step. So the next step, we look at support to the ministries of social affairs, the National Council of Child Welfare, to assign additional social workers to schools. We say we should form community-based child protection networks and further create and support social workers, because once we have the networks, they are in the community, the social workers are not there. So they will help in terms of identifying and addressing some of those situations for children. Then, of course, we talk about training of frontline staff, the teachers, the PTA members of the community-based child protection networks, and other community groups that are there. Once we ensure that those people are well capacitated to be able to identify and respond to child protection issues, then of course we will be ensuring a protective environment for children. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much to our presenters. I should say you have all actually managed your time extremely well, so we have lots of time for questions, and I hope that there will be lots of questions. Is there someone to help us run the mic around so that we can take? Yes, thank you, that's great. And while you are all thinking of your questions, I did just want to throw a couple of thoughts out there for your consideration and for the panelists. In particular, I think all of you outlined, obviously, because that's, I think, what you were asked, a very integrated model of approaching programming to reach children affected by armed conflict and to address their very specific vulnerabilities. One thing that struck me as I was listening to you was the challenge that Bo Victor set us this morning in terms of thinking about scale and sustainability. So I think all of you kind of mentioned that in your projects, and that you had a few kind of nuggets of how you might be increasing that, but that could be an interesting challenge to reflect on, I think, for all of us. So I think many of these projects are things that we've seen evolve over many years. The projects in the Congo, I think, have existed for many years. What do we need to do differently to take these to scale and make them sustainable? The other element that I think was, kind of really coming back from the presentations that we were set this morning, or the challenges we were set, was also the integration of the different projects between not only teachers and children, but also parents, family members, and community members, which I think was very strong in all of your projects. But I'd like to hear more from you in terms of the challenges. I think many of you identified in terms of your challenges the fact that actually the perceptions of the community and the stigmatization for children, especially those who might have been associated with armed forces or armed groups, was not necessarily changing. So maybe within the school, attitudes were changing, but not necessarily in the wider community. So that might be another kind of challenge to reflect on how we might do things differently. So while the panelists are mulling that over, I hope you've also had a chance to think of your own questions. We will probably just take maybe 2 or 3, and then come back to the panelists, and then we'll go back for another round. So can I see hands for anyone who has a question? Monique over here. Hanson. One over here. Okay.
Thank you very much. I have a question for the colleagues from DRC. We heard and we know that education has a protective character, but I would like to hear from them whether they have been able to measure how education has contributed to reducing the recruitment of children, or reducing the number of children joining an armed group or joining an armed group again, knowing that this is also an issue.
We had Alison here.
Hi, this is also for Olivier. At the end, he mentioned that one of the challenges was that girls were being drawn into sexual exploitation, and I wondered how they'd managed to address that challenge within their program. And I had another slightly small one, sorry, being cheeky, for Sylvester around whether or not he could just explain a little bit more about how the social workers at the school level, how that really functioned, and just a bit more information about that. That sounds really interesting. Thanks.
Okay, and there was the lady in yellow over here. It's also great to see that even though we have a predominantly exclusively male panel, the questions are coming from women at least, so we're somewhat addressing that one.
Je voudrais aussi poser 2 questions pour les 2 collègues qui ont présenté pour la République démocratique du Congo. Je voudrais savoir le type d'éducation qu'ils ont utilisé, notamment dans les zones qui sont affectées par les conflits. Est-ce que ces zones ont été accessibles? Et pour les zones difficiles d'accès, quel type de programme ils ont utilisé? S'agit-il de programmes alternatifs, condensés, ou des programmes normaux du ministère de l'Éducation? Et quelles étaient les précautions particulières qui ont été prises, notamment concernant les filles dans ces zones particulièrement touchées, où on sait que les filles, l'éducation des filles présente relativement plus de défis que l'éducation des garçons. Merci.
Okay, so actually the question was supposed to be from this lady over here, but while you're getting there, I can translate the question that was asked. So there was a question to the colleagues from DRC about the type of education that was being used in these projects, especially in conflict-affected areas. So first of all, were areas currently affected by conflict actually accessed? And if they were accessed, was it more alternative programming for education that was used, or was it Ministry of Education official curricula that was used? And then finally, also in terms of the particular precautions that were put in place in relation to girls, and especially relating to the specific dangers for girls in conflict areas. So our last question, so we'll just, because I don't want to exclude you, we've taken 4, so then we'll go back to the panel now.
Okay, thank you. So my question's directed at Henry, but I'm interested also to hear the perspectives of the other panelists. Henry, you talked about the child participatory activities that were integral to the intervention in the camp, and I'm interested to know the sort of opportunities but also the challenges that embedding children's participation presented within that model. And I'm also interested, because I think that's It's been touched upon today, but there hasn't been any significant focus on the role that children can play in supporting, education and protection in such challenging circumstances. I'm interested to hear from the other panelists that their perspectives on incorporating participatory programming within their work.
Okay, all great questions. So maybe we will start with the questions to our colleagues from DRC, which I will just quickly recall. Donc la première question, c'était en relation à s'il y avait une réduction de recrutement grâce à vos efforts, si vous avez pu mesurer cela. Il y avait aussi des questions particulièrement sur ce qu'on a fait pour réduire l'exploitation sexuelle des filles. Et il y a une question très proche de cela en termes de comment est-ce qu'on a pu avoir des réponses pour les besoins spécifiques des filles. Et puis finalement, de spécifier plus sur le type d'éducation dans les zones de conflit actives. Donc, je ne sais pas si... Maybe we should have the microphone back as easiest. Yeah. Yes, sure.
Merci pour les excellentes questions. Il est clair qu'avec l'expérience...
So, thank you for the great questions. It's clear that the experience...
Oui, il est clair avec l'expérience des CAP Tushtegeme au Nord Kivu, dans le cadre de la prévention des recrutements, il y avait un travail soutenu, un travail conjoint des autorités locales, des CAP Tushtegeme et les autres partenaires pour aller sensibiliser les seigneurs de guerre, les seigneurs des groupes armés, pour aussi...
So just in terms of the work done on prevention of recruitment, there was a joint work done with the different partners as well as local authorities to raise awareness with the different members of the armed groups.
On les formait, on les sensibilisait sur les droits internationaux humanitaires, sur la Convention relative aux droits des enfants. On continuait à les dissuader du fait des risques qu'ils couraient en fait en recrutant les enfants dans les groupes armés.
So there was training on international humanitarian law and awareness raising on that, as well as prevention. Sorry, I missed a part, yes?
Yeah, and the risk for the risks they would face by recruiting children.
And yes, so in terms of international humanitarian law, the risks that they could face, in case you didn't hear Audrey, I can't take credit for that.
Nous avons aussi constaté que la présence des humanitaires, si la zone était dissuasive, du fait que quand il y a des humanitaires, ils savent qu'il y a un œil regardant.
So the presence of humanitarians was dissuasive of recruitment in itself because they knew that someone was watching.
Et qu'il y a un mécanisme de communication qui existe et qui est solide.
And so then there was a good communication mechanism which was also quite solid.
Il y avait les activités qui étaient organisées aussi l'après-midi pour les activités psychosociales et les activités récréatives pour les filles et les garçons.
And they also then provided psychosocial activities for girls and boys and recreational activities.
Alors, je ne sais pas si ces quelques éléments ont contribué.
Peut-être ça c'est un élément intéressant, donc peut-être votre collègue va aussi répondre dans l'intérêt du temps.
Ok, merci beaucoup Olivier pour le complément d'information. Au fait, moi je vais répondre par rapport à la mesure préventive que donne par exemple l'école ou l'éducation. Parce que j'ai bien parlé dans les grandes leçons apprises que l'éducation contribue au fait à la prévention des recrutements et d'utilisation d'enfants.
So he specifically wants to comment on the preventive effect of education, so that actually just being in education is a preventive measure in itself.
Ok, donc nous allons partir des exemples concrets de la recherche que nous avons menée avec Child Soldiers International. En fait, lorsque on interroge les filles,
when we speak to girls.
Et lorsqu'elles disent, par exemple, j'ai été recruté par tel ou j'ai rejoint les groupes armés, c'est puisque mes parents n'avaient pas l'argent pour supporter mes études.
So when they explained that they were recruited by a specific person, or that maybe their parents had asked them to be recruited for money, essentially, so that they could earn money. Is that right?
Alors,
Or because the parents don't have funding to pay for school. Sorry, I didn't hear.
ok. Maintenant, si je trouve les gens qui peuvent payer pour moi, l'école, je pense que je ne peux plus encore rejoindre les groupes armés.
So if I have someone who can pay the school for me, then I would not join an armed group.
Voilà pourquoi nous avons pris en considération cette citation de cette jeune fille pour qu'elle soit réintégrée dans les circuits formels.
So that's why we took into consideration those specific needs for girls in terms of their integration in formal education.
Et alors, nous avons noté que l'éducation contribue au fait à la prévention des recrutements. Lorsqu'on est occupé, on est à l'école, on paye pour toi à l'école, on ne voit pas les raisons pour que cette fille encore regagne les groupes armés. Elle pensait qu'aller dans les groupes armés, elle va gagner de l'argent.
So that's how we see that education is really preventive in terms of recruitment. If we have a girl in school and we pay for her school, then we can't see any reason why she would join an armed group.
Voilà, ça c'est la première question.
Okay. I think il reste
Donc,
peut-être
il y a
juste l'aspect du type d'éducation utilisé dans les conflits plus actifs.
Les types de prévention.
Dans les zones qui sont affectées par le conflit, est-ce que vous avez accès à ces zones? Et si oui, quel est le type d'éducation? Est-ce que c'est le curriculum officiel du ministère ou est-ce que c'est plutôt une alternative?
Oui, donc en fait, nous parlons dans les contextes actuels des groupes armés.
So we're speaking about actual context of armed groups.
Alors, dans le contexte des groupes armés à l'est de la RDC, nous le savons tous,
So in the context of armed groups in DRC, as we all know,
en fait, ce sont des groupes armés qui sont constitués sur base clanique ou sur base ethnique.
so these armed groups are based on ethnic or clan affiliations.
Et avec l'approche communautaire que nous utilisons,
With the community-based approach that we use,
les communautés ou les regroupés jouent un rôle très important
so the community or the community-based child protection network plays an important role
pour faciliter en fait les acteurs de la protection de l'enfance l'accès à cette zone.
to facilitate the child protection actors to have access to that area.
Alors, par rapport à l'éducation, qu'est-ce que nous faisons?
In terms of education, what we do,
Il est question, par exemple, de contacter ces membres de regroupés
so we contact the member of the child protection network
et de nous aider en fait à faire des sensibilisations de proximité pour atteindre ce seigneur de guerre
so then we do awareness raising in close proximity.
avec des sensibilisations orientation.
So with orientation and awareness raising.
On leur dit qu'ils doivent garder l'école. C'est un objectif civil qui doit être protégé.
So they should be going to school, and it's a civil, an objective of society, of civil society, that they should be protected.
Au cas où, par exemple, il y a eu des affrontements entre ces groupes armés et les FARDC,
So where there are conflicts between armed groups and the armed forces of the DRC,
il y a des formations ou de l'éducation ponctuelle qui sont en train d'être faites. On organise des cours de rattrapage scolaire.
so in some contexts they organize catch-up classes and informal education.
Oui, par exemple, il y a une accalmie.
Pardon?
En cas d'accalmie,
Sorry, when it's in peace, yes?
quand il y a accalmie, on commence à observer les zones de retour dans la communauté. Les enfants doivent reprendre les circuits normaux de leur éducation.
So when it's possible and children are not displaced, they can go back into normal schools.
Voilà.
Okay,
Je ne sais pas si j'ai bien répondu à ta préoccupation.
So he hopes he's answered that question. Et merci d'être patient avec la traduction. So, and thank you to all of you for being very patient with my terrible translation. Okay, so we have, yes, maybe 10 minutes, so can I maybe pass to our other panelists to answer some of the questions related to child participation?
Yeah, and social workers.
And
Yes.
the social workers in school, so that's one each, maybe.
Mine is on you were asking about the roles of the social workers in school. Am I correct? Okay, their roles are like any other social worker. They are enabler, they are brokers. What do I mean by that? Children in affected areas oftentimes come up with, they may experience violence at home, in the community, or even in the school. And that affects their own learning ability. So the role of the social worker there is to see if they can link, once identified, they can link these children to services that will enable them to relive their lives as children. So some of them could be like a child has been abused, how can we support this child through our referral mechanism and so forth? Or how can we engage the community or the parents on these issues? So the roles of the social workers are just like any other social workers, though they may not have in-depth social work knowledge on some and so forth. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
I wish to address the question that was asked about the children involvement in a school context on protection. Yes, it's a very valid question that without disrupting the teaching learning processes, protection can be integrated in education. And the approach that we have used is using the co-curricular method, where we empower both the children and the teachers to participate meaningfully in co-curricular activities using a thematic approach on specific areas of concern that are of concern for protection. And we start by training children within the club leadership so that they can manage their own affairs, and also help reach out the others in the normal school program. The other approach we used, or that has been piloted and has borne results, is using a mentorship program where we approach people from the society who are recognized, who are respected in the community, and we approach them within the club context to come and talk to children and mentor them regarding specific areas, particularly for girls. This has worked very well in our context. The other one that I mentioned here was the scouting model, or the scouting movement, that again is a co-curricular activity, but is supposed to be a movement that is a day-to-day activity that children can get involved in on day-to-day basis. So it's working within the Ministry of Education, supporting the curriculum activities in co-curricular, and in that entrenching or supporting protection issues that we have identified to be pertinent in a certain context. And this has really worked very well, so that we don't get into conflict with the Ministry of Education. We appear that we are supporting the Ministry of Education through thematic activities, and we really persuade the Ministry of Education to consider programming or a thematic approach on programming co-curricular activities that are supportive to protection. You had a quick one on challenges, on how that can work, or how that has worked. One, in Dadaab, particularly in this context, the government of Kenya has a policy that is called encampment policy, that no refugee is allowed to leave the camp. Be the refugee, if either the refugee is a child or a parent. So that has been one of the challenges, because in order for children to interact with other children from, quote unquote, the rest of Kenya, that has always come in very challenging. And we have to get government movement authorization, and it's quite a rigorous process. Two, the other challenge is that the schools in Dadaab are not registered. The schools in that context are not registered as public schools, so they are just considered as refugee schools. And that being the case, it's also very very difficult, very challenging to involve the government, the Ministry of Education, local government education officials fully into the running of the refugee education programming. So that's quite a challenge. One of the other key challenge that is coming from the government or legal directive that the Kenyan government has given is voluntary repatriation. That has really affected the children in more ways than one. We are talking of 2 camps that were closed down, camps that were fully developed with schools and infrastructure, but that were forced to close down in order to demonstrate repatriation or voluntary repatriation. We had very sad cases of children who would not accept the fact that their school has closed, and would walk from the new camp all the way to the closed school without any protection, and would stay in school waiting for their teachers. And that took a lot of time for them to be cancelled. Those are some of the overarching or political decisions that can impact directly on a person, on psychosocial issues of children. And of course, the major challenge is on funding. You do not get calls for proposal that are consolidated. I think that came in the morning, and I think this is a direction we need to advocate for. That the calls for proposal that we get are specific for education or specific for protection, and we may need to advocate for integrated approaches as a new thinking, so that if we present a proposal that is integrated, the donor that may be viewed as education proper may support it. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we might have time for possibly one more reflection. Okay, I saw you first, so I'm going to go with over there. If we have the microphone, we'll take them one at a time, so we can go right until the end. So if not, then I have 2.
Good afternoon. My name is Francis. I'm with UNICEF in Eastern DRC, Goma. I wanted to add to what my 2 colleagues from the North and South Kivu said with regard to child soldiers particularly. I would not get into the programmatic aspects, but it was just to respond to one of the comments on whether education has reduced the risk of children joining the armed groups or the risk of children rejoining. And then there was a second aspect on education and insecure regions. So with regard to the first aspect and the impact of education on children joining armed groups, it's been clear too, through sensitizations of communities and within schools, there has been an impact, because you tell the child, or whether girls or boys, that their place is within the educational structure. So that aspect does have an impact on the willingness of children to join armed groups. Now, once you start talking about children rejoining armed groups, education has no impact on that, because then you need to start looking at the causes, the fundamental causes why children join armed groups. Let's say you have a program within the context of a DDR program where you demobilize a child and then you try reintegrating the child. They go through a particular process. Then after that process, the child finds themselves in the same situation where the reason why they joined the armed group, for instance, is present again. So at that point in time, there's nothing you can tell the child. You can't tell a child, okay, we've gone through this particular process, now you're back into your community, you have the right to education, but there is no means of surviving. They have needs, you're looking essentially at a community that is vulnerable. So unless you can address the vulnerability of a community, there is, at least, I apologize for my pessimism, but unless you can address the vulnerability of a community, there is nothing you can do to prevent the rejoining of children into armed groups. How many minutes do I have?
None.
Okay,
thank you. Though. That was a very interesting reflection. So I think we had one colleague here. We still have 3 minutes. So I think we had one more person who wanted to make a comment. So if you can keep it to 1 minute.
I'll try. A general question, perhaps looking just for a one-word answer from the panelists. Coming back to something that Victor raised this morning about do you think your interventions can be scaled up, can be exported into other contexts? Je peux dire en français si vous voulez.
Allez-y, oui.
Alors, c'était juste une question pour tout le monde, pour vous demander. C'est un point qui a été soulevé par Victor ce matin, la possibilité d'augmenter, d'exporter vos interventions dans les autres contextes, de scale up. Je ne sais pas, scale up en français, c'est augmenter, je sais pas.
Okay, I think that we were probably not going to have time for one more comment, so I think this is a perfect question to end on, if we can have a one-word answer from each of our panelists, and then those of you who are interested to hear their pitch as to how it would be scalable can go and see them after the session. So maybe I will start with our panelists towards the end and come back so that you have time also to digest the translation.
Yes. Our,
You said one word, it is possible.
Okay, we'll give it to you. Alors, en français, un mot.
Un mot. Pour la question
Oui, donc est-ce que vous pensez qu'on peut augmenter, répliquer votre approche? C'est simplement oui ou non?
Oui. Oui.
Merci. Alors, votre collègue, vous pouvez formuler comment après, mais on n'a pas le temps sur le panel, donc on va juste passer.
Oui.
There we go. So that can counteract the pessimism of our colleague over there. We'll end on that very positive note. But please do come and see the panelists to hear their ideas as to how they would make it scalable and sustainable. So thank you for that great question to end on. And thank you to the panelists.
Thank you, everyone.